I've created almost 100 science videos for the classroom. The videos cover every next generation science standard for biology and earth science, including astronomy. Show them in the classroom, assign them to your students who are absent, use them as supplemental materials, or use them to learn yourself. You can pick individual videos for as little as $1 or save 10 to 20% by getting a bundle. Search Planet Peterson on Teachers Pay Teachers or click the link in the description. Two plus two will never equal 5. How can that work if the universe is chaos? Doesn't that point to a designer? So I think our biggest problem here is you have things that don't at all correlate or overlap. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is just a logical linguistic statement. It's how do I say that? It's true according to the rules of the language and how grammar and logic works. The universe, so I don't think that that's really special in any sense, because I can sit here and say all flippity flops are zippity doos, and that's an eternal truth because I have declared by fiat for that to be the way it works, and that's how language works. Every single thing, symbol, meaning, word, diphthong, whatever, every article of language has its meaning dictated at some point. This means that. And these things together in relation to other things mean other things. I don't find that to be particularly awe-inspiring or anything. The universe is not chaos. The universe operates according to natural law, like the laws of physics. Or I mean that's typically what I say. And then as far as a designer, that again, because logical statements exist, that must mean that there's a designer. That I also have no idea where you could possibly be going with that, because even if we say logical truths are eternal or whatever, imagine that a universe just simply doesn't even exist, but there's a God that exists. On what grounds would any claim that God makes be true? There would be no grounds, except that God just declares them to be true. But this is completely irrational. Because there's no... Well, it's completely unjustified, I guess I would say.
That's actually a pretty good point. I have one question, though. Do you believe that time and space are eternal?
They may be, yeah.
How would that be possible? Wouldn't we face an infinite regression?
No, because eternal doesn't mean that the amount of time going backwards goes on forever. Eternal can just mean there's a point where time begins, and then it's eternal in the sense that it never didn't exist. And that's the eternity of... That's the eternal aspect of it. So, that could be one thing. Or if time doesn't behave like it does in the universe as we experience it now, where it seems very linear, if time is cyclical, I mean, it could be linear and cyclical, I guess, if it goes in one direction, perhaps, then this idea of a beginning is just not the correct question or even assumption to make. Now, I'm not telling you that is the answer, but I don't see any logical problem with it. And so the biggest point is we are not left with saying the universe began to exist at this point, and so that begs the question of what made the universe begin to exist. We have no evidence of anything ever being created. So,
but wouldn't time being eternal and still not existing at one point, wouldn't that be a paradox?
No, I said it never didn't exist.
All right. But then we face the infinite regression again.
No, there's no infinite regression, because I'm not telling you that there's a series of events. Now, if it's cyclical, is a series of events, but it's non-linear, and so that's not a problem. But the idea that it could also be that this is the only universe that there ever has been, but before cosmic inflation or whatever, before the Big Bang event that's began 14 billion years ago and is still happening, then space-time as we understand it is compressed into a state where the laws of physics become this grand unified thing, and then the universe exists, but the passage of time and cause and effect as we understand them aren't the rules that operate in that universe. So it exists eternally, and then it evolved into the current cosmological state, we could say, that we find it in today.
But I face the problem also of morality. Where does our morality come from? If morality is subjective, then anyone doing anything is justified out of their perspective, no?
I don't really see how that's exactly the case. If God exists, then anybody believing that I'm doing God's will allows anybody license to do whatever they want. So theism does not provide you with a unique perspective here. All it does is allows people to say, well, I don't want to go to hell for eternity, so I just need to obey so that I end up in the good place. There's nothing objective about that. As far as can morality be objective or subjective, I mean, I think it's subjective, but even declaring that it's objective, I don't think that scores any points for the God idea, because you run into so many dilemmas. If God is a being who can only do moral actions, then God is bound by moral facts and moral law, which means they exist independent of that God. If an action, if literally any action is permissible so long as it has the endorsement of God, or if God does it, then it's completely subjective. So that just obliterates, there's no good argument in there, I feel. But even if it is subjective, does that tell us, is that just simply too unpalatable for us? Well, I don't really think so, because I think you can say that morality is subjective, but you can ground it in an objective, in things that are objective in the sense that they are like true, which is basically part of the definition for what it means to be objective. So human beings who are not suffering some sort of psychosis or psychopathy or whatever are adverse to, in general, pain, or certainly things that are maladaptive or cause death and destruction, suffering, etc. in our species. And we know that, you can see this in primates and lower, quote unquote, lower organisms. They treat members of their group that, how do I want to say that sort of decrease their survivability. They ostracize members of those groups, so they kind of have a moral policing biologically ingrained in them. Now you can make the argument that, well, yeah, but if I'm a psychopath and I take control over things, and by brute force I simply enact my will, and whatever else, and you can even imagine like the most horrible thing, like forcibly reproducing with women so that you can carry on your genes or whatever, then we can't say that that's wrong, and then that's also biological, right? And you can say that, but literally, like, historically, whenever that happened, that kind of stuff doesn't last forever, because oppressed people cannot stand being oppressed, and they rise up and they cast off those shackles that have bound them. But also, if you get to a point where psychopaths in the gene pool keep replicating, then the psychopaths don't work well with each other, because they're all in it for their best interest instead of the interest of the group. And then that inevitably either collapses the population, or it weeds out those members of the group naturally. So just kind of I mean, it's like literally been simulated and
I
proven
see.
with computer models. So
I see where you're going, but my problem is with subjective morality. Let's say, I think pretty much everyone uh, unanimously agrees on grape being something horrible and immoral, right? But what if it isn't? Or what if someone had a justified reason to do so? Then, like, where do we ground our laws in? Just because the majority thinks it's wrong and the majority thinks it's right, that's how we do things. And I feel like we kind of come across a problem here with subjective morality or atheism as a whole.
well, I think you can at a point like that you can approach it logically. So, like, can anybody give a logical reason why it's okay for me to harm you, but you are not allowed to harm me? There's no case to be made. There's no actual good logical case to be made there. So I think that we should use like people say, if moral actions or moral prescriptions don't come from a god, where do they come from? And a typical answer I usually give to that is from rational minds. Rational minds are capable of figuring these kinds of things out. But even if, whatever problems this supposedly comes with, like, well, if we just use mere human rationality, then we will do bad things. But you ask somebody, okay, you've decided that this thing is bad. What if God did it or told you to do it? Well, it's not bad anymore. It's like, okay, then you don't believe in objective morality either. Believing in God gives you license to do any atrocious act you want. And not believing in God, you can say it does the same thing, although I think the track record shows that the less dogmatically religious people are, the more peaceful they tend to
But
be, as long as there are systems in place. So
but isn't like Saudi Arabia the most safe country of all, like currently? I
no,
thought I saw a statistic like that. Maybe I'm completely wrong. My bad. I
they
thought it
they
was.
throw people off rooftops there.
Oh shit. All right. That was, well, my bad. But I have another question. It's kind of not about religion, but maybe a little bit, maybe to some. I just want to hear your what you think about it. Where do you think, or how do you think the pyramids came about? Like, do you really think the Egyptians were capable of building those monstrosities?
Yes.
How?
Well, I would say very slow. My very boring answer is very slowly and using mechanical advantage. There are really cool videos of, like, on YouTube you can watch, of one guy moving stones that are multiple tons in extremely simple ways. Like, one thing he does is he creates like a balancing beam kind of thing in the middle, and then he walks to one end of it and places so the other end rises up, and then you put something under that to keep it there, and then you walk to the other end and it tips over even higher, and so you put something close to the fulcrum to keep it there. So what you're basically doing is you're shifting the fulcrum like just a tiny bit in either direction, but because you're putting all that extra weight on each side, it keeps basically the block like goes like this. There are some pretty simple demonstrations that show that you can move. And the other thing people get wrong is the vast majority of blocks from the pyramid are made of limestone, and that limestone is far less heavy than the granite stones in parts of the core of some of those pyramids.
So, do you think it's an irrational position to hold to think that it's maybe aliens influenced it, or some sort of creature?
Well, yeah, because we don't have direct evidence of aliens, and not knowing how humans did it does not score points for the alien hypothesis. That's just an argument from incredulity.
All right. Then my last question is: has there ever been a religious or theistic argument, wherever it be transcendental or from the book itself, that had you like scratching your head, like, oh, this might be a little bit, convincing, or I don't know, true, or has there ever been something?
not really. I wouldn't say that, but the moral arguments are kind of the hardest to deal with. But that's only because, how do I say it? They're the hardest to deal with because they're asking you to provide an alternative explanation that somehow is objective, not just more objective, but is objective. And I think that that's really difficult, and it leads you to have to concede that, like, for example, if this horrible group of people over here does something, you can't tell them that they're wrong. It's like, well, that's really tricky to deal with. But I would say I actually can tell them that they're wrong because I do believe that they're wrong. What you're conflating is I wouldn't be able to convince them that they're wrong. That would be very difficult, although it has been done, obviously. But again, the important thing to keep in mind when that happens is, like, this happened. I've had this conversation so many times. Somebody tells me, well, you couldn't tell the Nazis that they were wrong. And I said, what if God told the Nazis to do what they did? Then you couldn't either. And they, so there's nothing special with the alternative explanation isn't special.